We have many legends that tell us, Yurok people, how to live in a good way. The story of abalone and dentalium is an important legend that specifically addresses issues of domestic violence, a very serious offense in Yurok culture.
We have the story of abalone and dentalia, that you don't wear them together because they had a history way back of how they got to be the way that they are, and that's supposed to remind us to not be mean to one of each other physically. And there's lots of traditional stories that tell us the old people saw that as an unbalance. They knew it wasn't good for a man or a woman to be mean to one another.
You know, domestic violence has always been here. We can hear it in our stories, and we just got to listen to it. And once we listen to it, we say, okay, it's not a good thing to do, because this is the results of it.
You can look to stories like the story with the owl where the abuser was removed from a family, and certain types of things, negative consequences, came down to his kind for eternity. So it leads me to think that domestic violence or being stingy and abusing his wife and children was really looked down on. It's really hard for me to separate out what's traditional and what's happened in this terrible break that we've had in our culture.
Since the gold rush, Yurok people have experienced a bleak and devastating history. Our social and spiritual lifeways have been significantly altered. Historic grief now lives in our communities.
Prior to contact, Yurok people cared for each other amongst themselves as family members and leaders and elders within villages. And social services has had to take the role of, since contact, we are those providers or people that bring each other together. Our living systems and way of taking care of each other isn't completely intact the way it used to be.
When we have generations of trauma and chaos and dysfunction, you know, many individuals maybe aren't taught how to interact with a partner and a loved one in a healthy, productive way.
After conquest, I think this really manifested is massacres. It happened, and it's a true history, and I think a lot of it was like survivor's guilt, or you got that hurt, deep hurt, where you're living, but your wife or your babies, your daughters, your grandmothers, brothers, sisters, fathers, are gone, but you're still there. And then you're put on this place where, this is you're supposed to act, and we're going to bring you food. We want you to become citizens, civilized citizens.
I think for us Indian people, I know some people don't like to talk about it or like to say it, but I think a lot of us feel a lot of rage underlining, whether it's from the boarding school era, it's from before that, it's from the period of when, it wasn't good to be Indian, it was less than to be Indian. I think our grandparents and great-grandparents carried that with them.
We have experienced hardship. We have experienced genocide. At some point, we have to take it upon ourselves as men, as Yurok men, as Yurok women, as Yurok families, to say, not on my watch anymore.
What drives them to hitting their woman, their spouses? What drives them to alcohol, drug addiction? Many reasons, but one major reason, and that's the lack of opportunity to be who we once were. And so that this is how we look at to begin to combat drug addiction, alcoholism, and physical and sexual abuse.
Domestic violence now impacts each of our families. Spousal abuse, child abuse and neglect, and elder abuse are all issues that the Yurok Social Service Department seeks to resolve.
One family or every family, everybody is affected by it. If they were honest with themselves and thought about the relationships that they saw, they would then say, I know somebody who lives in a situation that's not healthy, that's not safe.
I would say probably 87% of our child welfare cases are domestic violence related, or it's probably a greater number than that. But many of those children live in households where there's some form of violence. And, you know, oftentimes that's the reason, domestic violence and substance abuse, why the children are exposed to neglect or whatever the problem may be. And domestic violence is pretty rampant in all of our areas.
Maybe one of mom's partners beat him, or he beat mom, and those are the memories he has that he carries with him. That's all he knows is the violence. We're seeing mom's partner pound on her, pound on him, or pound on other kids in the home, and the kid is growing up with these frustrations of having a different dad or father figure in the home all the time, and he doesn't know how to express that anger and frustration, and so he grows up to become an offender himself.
When young kids see that at a young age, or periodically through lives, or constantly through their life, then that becomes their norm, and they think that that's normal, that mom and dad, who doesn't fist fight, and you know how everybody's mom gets drug around, and everybody's dad gets slapped upside the head, and you know everybody's grandma is treated bad and money taken from her, or you know everybody's grandpa is talked down to and left and is being treated mean. And I think that we are in our constantly revolving cycle then of that, where the kids grow up and then she accepts that or he accepts that because that's what they saw.
And the boy wants to be loved by his dad, but his dad never was able to love like that. He'd put his guard up and say, "What are you, a sissy? Men don't cry." So I think it stems from their dad. And if the dad could learn to love their son like the son wants them to, I think that's a really good healing process.
But the children that are below and around you, they may grow up to be medicine people, and you know what, they see this and they can't, you know, grow into this.
Our community struggles with many different forms of domestic violence: intimate partner violence, females hitting, family violence, verbal violence, and a lot of that is caused from a loss of child rearing practices, for people to also be accountable to each other and their families, loss of traditional values and practices.
Once two people are together and one person violates the other person's boundaries by slapping, hitting, physical, or emotional, mental, I believe that the next time it becomes easier unless it's dealt with at that time.
I've dealt with it in just in my house. You know, through the years, I was probably one of the people that were doing that. But somehow someone's kept telling me over and over, it's not right, you don't do it. And what really came to light is when I gained my sobriety. Then that really cleared the water up. Because like was said, those things numb that part of the brain that tells us to do right. And once they get numb, you know, we'll black out and do things and not realize it. But that's no excuse. So as through sobriety, I've learned that, you know, I see a lot of it. And some people will come and say, you know what, you need a place to spend the night because this happened or that happened. And our door is always open.
It's just not okay to be mean and abusive to our loved ones, to our families.
I just saw this lady screaming for help, and she was just running down the road with her child, must have been like 1 or 2, and she had her on her hip. And so I pulled over
got her in the car, and I took off because the guy was still running after us. And so I drove down the road, and then I saw public safety, and I flagged them down. And they picked her up, and I guess they found her a shelter and put her in, drove her down there.
I explain to people, it's like, how can you say you love your mate or your children when they're sitting there with scars and black eyes and bruises and stuff, and then actually go and tell them, oh, but I love you, I did it out of love. It's like, how can you look at that person and say I love you when they're sitting there with, in tears and bruises and black eyes, or maybe their eyes so swollen, or fat lips and busted teeth? That's not right. That's not, that's not love.
I've seen domestic violence firsthand, and for me, it was just, it just made me feel so powerless, and made me feel so sick in my stomach to know that I could, that I didn't do anything about it. It hurts my soul, to know that that's happening, and then also, being a part of that.
Somebody controlling you, and you have no hope and no way to get out because you know he'll do it, and you have no strength to go on because you're so weak from being abused from him.
A Yurok woman probably, well, like I said, she probably has been on there for life, and you don't see a difference. You think, well, for my mom, she went back. She was beaten so badly by my dad, and I could talk about him now. I mean, she was beaten. They probably have no self-esteem. He beat her so bad, and burned her clothes and stuff. So for me, I think she had this low self-esteem that lived it because she probably figured that's what love is.
You're lucky you're alive the way you look. Her nose is broke, her lips are all broke up, busted scars. It was sad. You just tell them you just get it through their head. They have to leave right, now. Grab your kids and run. You ain't got enough in that house to keep you happy and whatever. You leave everything. Yep.
We call it elder abuse, where the kids come home and they beat up their mom or their grandma. That's domestic violence also, and those issues also need to be addressed, where we have kids beating up their parents or their grandmas. And a lot of times that's drug-related also.
We have to be good to our elders and not treat them bad, because elder abuse, is just about the sad. All abuse is sad, but, to see an elder who, is being taken advantage of or being used or is being held hostage practically, that's heartbreaking. That's unfortunate.
Anger and violence among Yurok men can no longer be accepted. We need to change. Please talk with us. We can help.
There are resources available. There are people that can support her, including our advocates. There are cultural people. There are other options. And, just keep being there for the individual, and then when they're ready to make different choices, we have a plan. We were able to move on her plan and what she's ready to do.
It is extremely difficult to come forward, but knowing that they're not alone, that there are resources, and that there are positive, healthy people who are willing to listen and willing to be supportive, and to not feel ashamed and embarrassed if they're not ready to leave, because oftentimes they do go back, and they will go back, but providing them with the tools to be able to access the resources if and when they are ready.
There's always something better in life, there's not just that, if you look around and if you have family, go to them and they'll help you, and if you don't, go to your friends. There's always someone there to help you and talk to, and even if you have to go to your tribal members or the tribe, no one's going to look down at you if you need help, come and just ask,
My message would be to seek as much family, friends that are positive role models in your life, and to tell yourself that you have the courage to get out and move forward, not only for yourself or if you have kids, but it's the most important thing, is your children and your life.
We have to educate the women in our community and let them know that this isn't normal, and things may be tough. You may not have a car, you may not have a ride, but you'll get around it and you will survive. And that's what I try to relate to the women that I deal with in the community, that it's not okay for a man to pound on you. It's just unacceptable.
The Yurok Social Service Department needs the support and involvement of all of our tribal members if we are to stop domestic violence in our communities.
Oftentimes when you're living in a cycle of abuse, whether you're the abuser or the abused, it's a continuous cycle, and it's hard to even realize what's going on right in front of your face. So for us, it's getting the word out, the message out, what the values are of our community. And this isn't a value of Yurok people, but we have one of the highest rates out of any other group of people.
Now, to get people to understand that even if a person out of rage says, "I hate you," or "I feel like hitting you," that is the seeds of this abuse. And to immediately or thereafter, somewhere in there, say, let's go to counseling. Let's go in. Let's find out where this is coming from.
The people that are the ones that are doing the hurting, if they could understand that we know you hurt somebody that you love because someone hurt you and someone hurt them, and start to lay out that responsibility of this has happened and it's manifested in our community. So, but that doesn't mean it's okay. And that doesn't mean you get to keep hurting somebody. Now it means you have to get better, and we have to end that cycle so that, our kids don't continue to live like that.
It's hard to break the cycle, I think. When you're raised in that environment, it makes you have a lower self-esteem, and when you get into relationships, you kind of feel like that's how love is shown, I think, in a way. And so you have to retrain your mind and yourself to learn that that's not acceptable, and you don't have to tolerate it, and it's not love to be treated like that. So I think that's why it continues on through generations and generations. So you have to make a point to let your children know, that it's not okay and that's not an acceptable way to live. Otherwise, we're raising our kids to think it's okay to live like that. So.
But I think any community, is coming and grasping that same solution-based approach. Is how do we change this cycle? Do we take on the aspects of historical trauma? How do we deal with that today? Again, for me, it's taking on that responsibility of what am I doing, and how are we going to collectively heal.
The Yurok Social Services Department believes that cultural intervention, traditional education, ceremonies, and Yurok lifeways are critically important for breaking the cycle of domestic violence.
Perpetrators are victims, are Native, whether it's men or women, are victims of violence themselves. Our whole community has suffered violence, and perpetrators can be healed by being reeducated, by being supported, and by being incorporated into our cultural values and beliefs. And we can't give up on people that make mistakes. Really, it's about education. Some people take 10 years. Some people, it's one incident. Sometimes it's a mentor, and other times it's time to themselves and being connected to prayer and cultural values.
I am a firm believer that our culture, our traditional practices, and the reinstilling of some of our traditional values all have an important place in healing of individuals, families, and communities.
The reason that there's a lot of family violence today is partly because we've become so far distanced from our values and our understanding and knowing our roles in our community. I think that it's changed so much from how we, in our communities, we knew like what our role was. We knew what our role as in our relationships with our family, with our partner, and in the community as a whole. As spirituality, we knew that better.
People have forgotten or maybe ignored or chose not to be a part of our dances and our ceremonies. I think when you take that out of a Yurok person, it creates an imbalance. I think that we inherently need that. We need that sense of why we're here and our purpose. And you start taking those things away from us, and instead you fill it with drugs and alcohol. It creates a lot of angry, misguided people that are hurting one another, whether intentionally or not.
To me, what helped me out was prayer and going to our dances and things like that, and watching, hanging out with the older people that lived life and would give you good advice, and that's how I deal with my anger.
When they lose their culture and who they are, they lose their identity. To get their identity back in a cultural way, it would definitely lessen the domestic violence by probably 100%.
Our important dances talk about balance, and domestic violence is not balance. Domestic violence is imbalance, where something has taken over and needs to be put back into balance so that you can live in harmony, in a good way.
We have to say we're going to make a change. We're going to make a conscious, collective change in the way we think and the way we act out our emotions, the way we act out our positive attributes as well.
And I think once we start taking that mask off and talking about it and saying, this isn't okay, and that's not okay, that these are not healthy norms, I think we'll live like that. But we have to step up as Indian people, as Yurok people, and own up to what's healthy and what's safe and what's not, so people that may or may not know that they're living like that can start putting a face to that name.
The hope is that the tribal community, service providers, tribal leadership, outside community will see that the Yurok tribe is serious about taking a stance on eradicating and diminishing domestic violence in our communities, that we're acknowledging it does exist. We're all affected by it. None of us can say we're not. We're tired of turning a blind eye to it, and we're committed to taking some steps to creating healthy families and a healthy community.
She is strong, and that she can make choices, better choices with her life, and that she's worth more than being abused, and that she has something much more stronger and something to give, and that we're here to support her, and that she's a strong woman.
Chatskuik sa he wecham. Live in a good way.
If you or somebody you know feel like you may be in a cycle of domestic violence and are interested in more information about resources, tools for healthier relationship building, or changing unproductive behaviors in your relationships with loved ones, please contact the Yurok Tribe Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Program at 707-482-1350 or look up resources on our website at www.yuroktribe.org. All services, contacts, and telephone calls are kept confidential and are facilitated by trained professionals.